Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. It is October. Somehow we are back in October and early deadlines are approaching. So for those of you who are seniors who are applying this year, if you have not started working on your applications, now is the time. For those of you who are applying in some form of early decision, early action, priority, whatever that looks like. As you're finalizing those applications, we have information for you and tips for both the supplemental essays and for the activity section. But equally weighing, I believe, on many people's minds is applying for financial aid. And applying for financial aid means completing the FAFSA. And so we're going to talk about that first. And joining me for that is my colleague and former financial aid officer, Chrissy Foran. Hi, Chrissy.
Hi, Beth. Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. Normally, we would have the FAFSA. It would be available for families to fill out as of October 1. So Correct. It is not available. What is happening?
Oh gosh, so much is happening. So normally if you're a family that's got a returning student and you're used to that October 1st deadline, it's not happening this year, unfortunately, with the FAFSA. So the Department of Education basically passed an act a couple of years ago called the FAFSA Simplification Act, and it was enacted back in 2021. They're basically making some major changes to the FAFSA. So because of that, the Department of Education is still kind of in the midst of doing all these updatings. So the FAFSA, they have said, is not going to be available until December sometime. We haven't heard an exact date, so stay tuned with us and hopefully we can give you some updates on that. But it's going to give families less time to get the form filled out, which is kind of the biggest issue. That's 2 less months you have. So I think this year it's really important for students to know, or families to know, what the college deadlines are to get it filled out. And those may change as well because it's opening late. So just a heads up, you may want to make sure you're checking your college websites for those deadlines.
Right. And 2 things that come to mind for me. The first is that the FAFSA didn't used to become available until January, February.
Right.
So
January 1st, it used to be available. So it's only been maybe, I don't know, 5 years or so that it's been October.
Right. So it's not unheard of for the colleges to be able to get this information slightly later than October 1 and do a fine job of preparing application or financial aid awards for students. So for families who are kind of freaking out about that piece, I'm sure the financial aid officers are freaking out a little bit, but it has been done in the past and it can be done again. Right.
Yeah,
and then Yep. Sorry.
I was going to say financial aid offices are all trying to take measures too to make sure that, nothing's late on their end because of all of this too. So hopefully it won't be a big deal to families and decision processes, but it's just a couple months later.
Right. And the other thing I think families need to keep in mind is that if the FAFSA is delayed past when it's supposed to be out, the colleges are going to adjust their deadlines accordingly, right?
Yeah,
they will do nothing without the FAFSA.
Yeah. And a lot of colleges already have deadlines of, February 1st or January 31st, that sort of thing to begin with. So there's not a ton of colleges that are saying, hey, get it filled out before the end of the year, unless you're doing something special. But typically, I think it's not going to be that big of a deal for the deadlines.
Right. Awesome. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the changes. So there are changes happening. What can you tell us about those?
Yeah, so they did some pretty big changes to this FAFSA, which I think is going to be good for families, because one of the big things is that they've simplified it. So they have made it a shorter version. So if you've ever filled the FAFSA out before, there's lots of questions, there's lots of tax information, lots of income questions. With the new form, they've actually cut out about 62 questions from the form, which makes the FAFSA now only about 46 questions long. So hopefully it's simplified, is what they're saying. So
right. 46 still sounds like version. A lot.
It does.
Yeah. It does. Well, one big change, will parents still have to provide tax information?
So that's going to be a little bit different too with this FAFSA. So in the past, parents would have to use something called the data retrieval tool. They would link back to the IRS website, sign in there, and then their information would be automatically transferred into the new FAFSA. With this new FAFSA, parents will still have to answer a few questions about income and assets, but once they submit the FAFSA, they will give their consent for the Department of Education to get their tax information on the back end. So they're
Nice.
consenting to get it from the IRS. So the parents, that's kind of a big step the parents don't have to do anymore, which in the past has been kind of a headache for some families. So hopefully that again will be a good thing.
Right. Absolutely. Because if it didn't work for some reason, that was on the families
Yeah.
to figure out. Now, the
Yeah.
colleges will obviously figure that out. And hopefully maybe the back end piece makes it a little bit easier for the colleges
Exactly.
too. Who knows? Right. Um,
I hope so.
I think unfortunately for this year's group of seniors, the thing to probably keep in mind is just that it won't be without hiccups.
Right.
Yeah. Like any new process, it's going to
Yeah.
take a little bit to work out the kinks, and you're a family who is going to be subject to that, but oh well,
I think
just
December could be a little interesting as well, since everyone's going to be waiting and all of a sudden we'll get a date and every family will try to be on the FAFSA at the same time.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you can wait a couple of days, maybe let it, work out the kinks. I think that's fine too.
Wait a couple of days, maybe be on it early in the morning or
Yeah,
late at night, trying
absolutely.
not to be on when everybody else is going to be
That's
on will
heavy
probably be
traffic.
helpful.
Absolutely.
What are some other things that parents and students should be aware of with this new FAFSA? And this isn't the first time we've talked about what might be happening with the FAFSA, but we've promised everyone we're going to give them the latest and greatest. So what are some other new things?
So another nice change I think that's being made is, again, if you've had students in the past, students used to be able to only add 10 colleges at a time, which we've had more phone calls about, oh my gosh, I have 12, how do I add those 2 more?
Right.
So, and it is a bit of a process. It could be very cumbersome. So now with this new FAFSA, they are adding, or the maximum you can add now is 20 colleges on the one application. So hopefully that will take care of a lot of confusion, just having parents have to go back in after it's been processed. So 20 colleges now instead of 10, which is great. Another thing, just kind of in passing to let families know, is in the past when you submitted a FAFSA, the result that it would calculate for you was called your expected family contribution.
Mm-hmm.
And that was basically what they thought you could reasonably pay to help your child go to school. They've changed the name of that. So instead of having it called the expected family contribution, or EFC, the new FAFSA, you're going to get something called a student aid index, or an SAI is what colleges will likely call it. So the student aid index, it's just a new name to better indicate the number. It's a guideline for determining how much a student could afford to pay, not what they're expected to pay. So just some new names there, and the student aid report, which is the report you can get after the fact of filling out the FAFSA, that's now called a FAFSA submission summary. So they're just renaming lots of things too, just to be aware of. If you're looking for your student aid report, it's now a FAFSA submission summary.
Right. I get the idea behind the student aid index. I wonder if it will really be a meaningful change for families, right? Because the reality is that the student aid index, you may not be required to pay that much, because some colleges may expect you to pay more than that, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It all depends on the school you're applying to. So
it does.
I understand why they changed it, but I don't think I don't know how much less confusion it's going to cause, I guess, or help with. So
exactly. It's going to tell you something. It's not going to tell you everything. And I think that's the key. Yep. And then I just want to put it out there that just because you can apply for financial aid or fill out the FAFSA and send it to 20 colleges does not mean that you should be doing that. We do encourage students to have a very reasonable list of schools. And for me, that's somewhere between 7 and 10, maybe 12. I love that they've expanded it, because we certainly do have lots of students who apply to as many as 12. And it is nice to not have to do what you were saying, like wait and then go back and refill it or resend it to 2 additional schools. But just because it's available at 20, or you can do 20, does not mean you should be doing 20. Just going to throw it out there.
I agree.
One big change this coming year, I'm going to ask the question, but I already know the answer. And that is the FAFSA still going to consider having more than one child in college?
So that is one of kind of the bigger downsides to this new FAFSA, is that unfortunately that's going away. So again, if you're a family that was excited to have 2 kids in college and hopefully that helps your financial aid eligibility, the FAFSA has now, they're no longer considering that in the equation for financial aid eligibility. So if there are schools that use the CSS profile, some of those private schools that use a different application, you may be able to talk with them about using more than one child in college, seeing if they can do a special circumstance or something. But if you're just doing a kind of a FAFSA only school, chances are they're not going to consider more than one child in college anymore.
Right, right. And the idea behind that obviously being that the thinking is, why do you get a break? Because
Yes.
you were lucky to have your kids close in age,
Yes.
right?
So unless they were, one is 5 years older than the other, those parents never got a break. They just paid the same amount. But that's exactly why they got rid of it.
Right,
so a lot of parents we're talking to aren't real happy about that. But if you have twins, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, for sure. We have someone on staff with twins.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, you can certainly talk with the schools you're applying to, see if that's something they might consider. This year might be a little different going forward, but yeah, absolutely.
Do students and parents, are still going to need to get a username and a password to fill out the FAFSA?
Yeah, so that the process of that hasn't really changed. So when you're filling out the FAFSA, in the past, again, this is all different, but in the past, you used to be able to go in and get your student aid ID the same day, and then you could fill out the FAFSA without a problem. Because of all the changes they're making, now they're telling people if you could get a student aid ID with at least maybe 3 to 5 business days prior to filling out the FAFSA, because they need to basically check all of it, check your social security number with your birth date and your name and all of that. So they want to have all of that approved and processed prior to you filling out the FAFSA. So just don't try to go in and get your ID at the same time that you get the FAFSA filled out that day in December. So the good thing is you have a couple of months now that families can get one student. The student going to school needs to have their own student aid ID to sign the FAFSA, and then at least one parent. So they're even changing how that's kind of happening now. So if you're married and you're filing joint, you only need one parent to have an FSA ID. If you're married but you're filing separate tax returns, both parents need to get an ID. So there should be some help wizards on there that hopefully can walk you through that when it comes out in December. But definitely, if you can at least have one parent and the student get a student ID, now or even just a week prior to getting that filled out, that'll be a lot less hassle, I think.
Yeah, I mean, for people who are looking for how can we get ahead in the process, this is a great example. Once you're done listening to the podcast, go get your FSA ID and put it somewhere safe so that when it's time to fill out the FAFSA, you know where to find it and you haven't lost it.
Yeah, and even that process, getting your ID, I mean, there's a lot to that process. There's a lot of security questions and things you have to set up. So it helps if you can do it ahead of time.
Got it. All right. What if parents are divorced? Has that changed anything with the new FAFSA as someone who is divorced with a child in school?
Yeah, so again, one big change. They've really changed a lot with the FAFSA this year. It's amazing. But one big change, so it still remains the same. If you're divorced, the custodial parent is the only parent on the FAFSA. So you're only providing that parent's income and assets. What has changed, though, is the way they determine who the custodial parent is. So in past, the custodial parent on the FAFSA was the parent that the student lived with most in the past 12 months. With this new FAFSA, they're now saying they want it to be determined by who provided the most support in the last 12 months. So that can be a very big shift for some families. And, they haven't necessarily said how you determine that, if you're using who claimed them on a tax return, or if you're literally just saying, yeah, I know, so-and-so did the most support, so we're going to use that parent. So again, there's going to be a parent wizard on the FAFSA that will kind of walk a student through asking some of those questions as to if they're married, if they're divorced, who did you live with, who provided the most support. So that's going to be the biggest, I think, change for divorced families.
Got it. Okay. And last question for you. Oh, I lost my list of questions. Okay. Any other changes to providing income information? And just for our listeners who maybe are less familiar, income is the big piece when it comes to determining financial aid eligibility. So anything that's new on that front?
Yeah, so they do have some, aside from the taxes not having to be transferred in, which is great, but in the past, they would always have you tell them or include what were your pre-tax contributions to your 401k or retirement plans. So even though they didn't include your retirement as an asset, they still asked how much did you contribute to your 401k last year.
Right.
that would in turn raise your income, which raised your expected family contribution. That's going away. So they're not asking that question anymore, which is great. So parents could actually contribute more to a 401k, and that doesn't affect their financial aid eligibility for that question. The other big thing that changed was child support received. So again, in the past, there would be a separate question that said, how much did you receive in child support in the last, 12 months? That is now just going to be considered as an asset. And so for that to be considered an asset, it's going to account a lot less than if it were considered as income. So
Right.
the FAFSA has, certain calculations in place, and assets don't account for nearly as much of your expected family contribution as income does. So having child support considered an asset now, that can really help save families a lot of money and reduce that student aid index, I guess.
Right. Right.
The new expected family contribution.
And these seem like great changes because what's happening is you're not being forced to not save for your retirement,
Right.
or you're not being penalized for saving for your retirement. And child support, which goes to lots of different things and shouldn't and can't just go to paying for college, right, is going to be, they're not going to take as big a chunk. Or they're not going to look at as big a chunk, which I think is great.
Yeah, because in the past it was untaxed income, which was even a larger chunk. So
Right.
hopefully by doing all these changes, they're going to have what they're saying is more families will qualify for some help, for some need-based aid. But yeah, I guess we'll see. Hopefully it will be an easy process. Smooth for all the families out there.
Yes. All right, Chrissy, thank you so much for joining us and sharing the latest and greatest on the FAFSA simplification. Let's see if it truly is a simplification. We will report back when all is said and done in the spring. But for now, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to have more info on completing the activities section of the application. So don't go away.